Today's daf we're going to be learning is Bava Kamma, Daf Zion. Today's daf is sponsored by Amy Rubin in loving memory of Edith and Herb Rubin. Okay, there's a study guide today. I will recommend you use it. It will help organize things. It's a pretty, what's complicated about the sugya today is not going to be the organization of it, but it's going to be the content of it. We're going to get in the middle of our daf into content that's quite complicated. In fact, if we have time, we'll even see two different interpretations because it's very interesting, fascinating topic, which some of these topics we're going to see. In fact, most of Bava Kamma really is very relevant today, even though we don't necessarily all own oxen, and we don't have cows maybe, or things like that, but we all do have items that could cause damage. And we're constantly dealing with things, level of responsibility. And today we're going to talk about something else, but totally off topic, about what determines if someone is below the poverty line and what enables them to get Maser Ani. Okay, we're going to get very off topic at a certain point, and then we'll come back on topic. Okay, so that's a little bit of intro for today. We're going to start with trying to understand this opinion of Rabbi Akiva, which again, we already saw this whole sugya in Hanizakin, in Gitin. We're going to see it again, which is again, there's something very odd about the wording here. So we started with, we know the basic machloka between Rabbi Yishmael and Rabbi Akiva is, on what basis do we evaluate who the best land that we have to pay? And in the end, yesterday, we kind of fine-tuned it to really what they're discussing is a case where, let's say, I damage your property and I have to pay you back now. And my best land, my worst land is equal to your best land. Do I have to pay you based on my best land or your best land? One way to understand this in a conceptual framework is, we're going to see later today when the Gemara discusses this idea, why am I paying you back in land? Theoretically, I really should pay you money. I damaged you, I pay you money. And in fact, I can pay you money. But we allow me to pay land because land can be sold pretty easily. Okay? So now, if I'm just compensating you for what you lost, then I could pay you with land that's worth as much as your land is worth, because what do you need more than that for? Alternatively, you could say, no, maybe it's not. Is the idea that I'm compensating you. And therefore, it goes by whatever your bet, if something's good enough for you, then it's fine. I can compensate you with that. Why should I have to compensate you with something, of better land? On the other hand, if the idea is that how do you turn land into money? Well, you sell it. Now, if it's bad land, it might not be able to be sold very easily. This is something the Gemara is going to say at the end of today's daf, that it's hard to sell land that's bad quality. And if I get you stuck with bad land that you're not going to be able to sell, then it's not really worth so much. I mean, obviously you can plant and you can hopefully make some money off of it, but in the end, you really want to get compensated for the damage and get the money back. So like, let's say I, killed your shore, my shore killed your shore, again, maybe we should talk him, but I damaged your car, let's say, and I give you land and you can't sell that land. Well, you can't buy a new car if you don't get the land back, right? This is something, by the way, right? When you have insurance on a car, usually you get money back, not enough to actually cover a new car, right? It's kind of similar thing, different, but anyway, that's number one. That's two different possible ways of looking at it. So maybe I have to give you better land, but then why my better land? And if you say my better land as the one who damaged you, well, again, maybe it's not so much just compensating you, but maybe it's punishment for me. Or more so, what is punishment? It's a deterrent. If I know that I have to pay you by the best of my land, well, I'm going to be motivated more to basically make sure not to damage you, because it's a penalty for me to have to pay with my best land. So that's another way of looking at it. So there's different ways of conceptualizing what this idea of paying meitav is. So now if we go back to this machloka, Rabbi Yishmael, Rabbi Akiva, basically, is it based on my best land? That's Rabbi Akiva. And he says, right, so if my best land is way better than your best land, it doesn't matter. I still have to pay with my best land. And Rabbi Yishmael would say, no. In the case where your best land is equal to my worst land, I could pay you with my worst land. Okay, so now the problem is it's not exactly seen in the wording of Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Yishmael is very clear. He says, if you look back at the middle of Vav Bet, Meitav Sadeh, Meitav Karmo Yishalem, that's the pasuk. Meitav Sadeh of Nizak, Meitav Karmo Shel Nizak. It's all based on the best land of the one who was damaged. Rabbi Akiva Omer, lo baha katuv ela ligvot l'nizakim and ID. First thing he says, which we don't really understand what this means, the pasuk just said, okay, didn't come for what you're saying. It said to say that nizakim have to pay from the best. Vik vahomer lehekdesh. So notice he doesn't say the best of the damaged person's land. He just doesn't say that. And then it says, and all the more so for hekdesh. So the first question we had of Rabbi Akiva was, what is this vahomer lehekdesh? We suggested two things yesterday, which we rejected both, and there's a chart on today's daf with the two arguments. The first is my shiur gourd, a shiur of hekdesh. Maybe that's what it means, that I have to pay the best of my land, which the Gemara says, what are you talking about? You don't have to pay at all. It says shiur re'ehu, your friend's shiur. I don't have to pay damages if my ox damaged property that belonged to the temple. Okay, there is no such obligation. That's not what the pasuk was talking about. Well, maybe we leave the world of nizakin, okay, and the world of damages. And what it meant, vahomer lehekdesh, is if I pledged something to the temple and I didn't pay it, and the treasurer, or the whoever works for the temple comes to my house and says, listen, you didn't pay up, I'm taking it from here, they can take from the best of my land. And maybe that's what it means. To which the Gemara rejected and said, last few words of yesterday's daf, lo yehei ala ba'al chov, basically that's just a creditor collecting something owed, and ba'al chov bebenoni. And we know that a ba'al chov only has to pay the benoni, so you can't say that the laws of best of the land applies to that. So now we're stuck because it doesn't work with one, it doesn't work with the other. They're going to now try to resuscitate this one, but it's not going to work. Maybe Rabbi Akiva has a unique position, which, by the way, wouldn't surprise us. We've already seen a lot of unique positions of Rabbi Akiva. Right? For example, the one about the chayve lavim or mamzerim. Okay, that's probably the biggest radical one. You can reject that and say no. Now we go back to the first answer and use that as our argument that there's no way that Rabbi Akiva could hold that that collection of hekdesh that I dedicated to the temple is going to be as much as damages, because and that a ba'al chov, a regular creditor, is going to be able to collect higher and hekdesh also, because mala ba'al chov sheken yipako chov b'nizakin tomar behekdesh shehu rak chov b'nizakin. Even if you'd say, let's say Rabbi Akiva said ba'al chov is edit, has to pay the best. Let's go back to his line. So what he is saying in vahomer lehekdesh is saying, and all the more so if you want to collect from hekdesh. Hekdesh is obviously in a higher position for this. But wait a minute. The first part of the sentence, hekdesh, is not in a higher position, because the first part of the sentence is damages. Damages, you get paid for the edit. Now, if you damage hekdesh, you don't get edit at all. A ba'al chov, they're taking these two terms and they're connecting. A ba'al chov is basically someone who owes money, and theoretically, what they're saying is a regular person, the whole argument was, if it's for regular people, then all the more so hekdesh. But in terms of edit, it's not true. Because where's the laws of edit learned out where it's explicit in the Torah? It's explicit in the Torah by damages. Now, when it comes to damages, a regular person is in a better position than the temple, because the temple doesn't even get damages, because shiur re'ehu, and not shiur of hekdesh. So since hu rak chov b'nizakin, he has less power when it comes to damages. So this law of edit, which comes up by damages, if you want to apply it also to ba'al chov and say, and all the more so it will apply to hekdesh, that's just not true. Because you can't, it could be true, but the language of Rabbi Akiva that all the more so for hekdesh is actually weaker in the terms of the edit. So if he wants to say any ba'al chov can collect from the best, and all the more so hekdesh, that makes no sense. Okay, again, it could be true, but the language used by Rabbi Akiva that hekdesh is in a higher place is just not the case, because we just said hekdesh, you can't collect damages, so therefore it doesn't make sense to say that it's all the more so. It has much less likelihood to be getting the highest. So if option 1 doesn't work and option 2 doesn't work, and we tried very hard to make option 2 work and it still didn't work, let's go back to option 1. Now, even though until now we've been saying you don't know damages for a shiur of hekdesh, if you damage a shiur of hekdesh, well, now they're going to say, if you want to argue and say, but that's not true, you could say, again, maybe Rabbi Akiva has a unique position. Rabbi Akiva several Rabbi Shimon ben Menashe, and it's not just we're going to make up that he has a unique position, but there is someone who holds by this unique position. Ditan, Rabbi Shimon ben Menashe Omer. Shiur shel hekdesh and agach shiur shel hedyot. If there's an animal owned by the temple, right, which is common, because there are all these animals for sacrifices. So there's an animal designated as a sacrifice, and that animal went and gored a regular animal, some privately owned animal. Patul. Well, the hekdesh doesn't need to pay damages. That's the exemption for this kind of law. But shor shel hedyot shenagach shor shel hekdesh, bein tam bein mu'am meshalem nezek shalom. When the Torah said shor re'ehu, it meant for the fact that there's a difference between a shor tam and a shor mu'ad. Meaning, right, that if my ox scores your ox, if my, car damaged your car, I crashed into your car, right? What am I going to have to pay? Well, the first time it happens, right, it's not, right, again, this isn't what we do, but let's say we'd say, look, it was the first offense, we didn't really expect this was going to happen. Okay, it would have to be, the truth is it's a little different. That's different because I caused my car to crash into your car. But it would have to be something where it kind of just happens on its own. So in that case, since I didn't expect that kind of damage to happen, therefore I only have to pay half damages. But if I damage something belonging to the temple, there's no distinction between tam and muad. I actually have to pay full damages from the start. So now, right, this is a totally flipped position from what we saw before. One says you're totally exempt if you damage a shore of the temple. This says you're not exempt at all if you damage, and all the more so you're obligated to pay full damages. So now we can say that's Rabbi Akiva. He says, kal vahomer lehekdesh, if you're going to pay meitav for damages to a regular person, all the more so you're going to have to pay best damages to if you damage the shore of hekdesh. To which the Gemara says, okay, so now we've established what Rabbi Akiva means, kal vahomer lehekdesh, he must hold by Rabbi Shimon ben Manasseh. Now, according to this, we already understood that Rabbi Yishmael and Rabbi Akiva disagree about mazik or nizak, right? How do we determine the edit? Is it the best of my land or the best of your land? Now we're saying that they also disagree about Rabbi Shimon ben Manasseh. Do you have to pay for shor shel hekdesh or not? Because only Rabbi Akiva added the kal vahomer of hekdesh because Rabbi Yishmael thought there is no payment at all if you damage an ox of hekdesh. To which the Gemara says, well, remember, Rabbi Akiva never said it's evaluated based on the damages, right? Based on the person who caused the damage. He never says that explicitly. So ihachi, Rabbi Yishmael, Rabbi Akiva, why are you assuming they're arguing about a case where, my best land, my worst land is equal to your best land after I'm the one who damaged you, and I only have to pay my worst land according to Rabbi Yishmael, and according to Rabbi Akiva, I have to pay my best land, and that the whole thing is nizak mazik. Maybe they all agree that I only have to pay the best of your land. And maybe the only machloka between them is about the shore of hekdesh. What's the benefit of saying this? The advantage is, number one, he never says bidemazik shemina, right? Like I evaluate it based on the mazik. That's number one. Number two, whenever people argue, we always want to assume, the Gemara likes to assume they're arguing about the least amount of things. So why say there's two arguments going on here when you could just say there's one? And the whole debate is, do we hold like Rabbi Shimon ben Manasseh, do we not hold like him? Rabbi Akiva says yes. Rabbi Yishmael says no. Rabbi Akiva savar ka Rabbi Shimon ben Manasseh. Rabbi Yishmael savar ka Rabbanan, and Rabbi Yishmael holds like the rabbis. We disagree with. So which the Gemara is going to have three problems with this, okay? Because now you have to again look back at the wording of Rabbi Akiva. Imken my lo baha katuv. The first thing Rabbi Akiva says before he gets to the hekdesh is, that's not what the pasuk is coming to teach you. Right? Now, he doesn't exactly say what it is coming to teach you, right? What he does say is just that there's damages for people, right? That the nizakin have to pay the best of the land. Doesn't exactly say the best of their land, but he does seem to be disagreeing with what he said before he even gets to the hekdesh part. Ve'od my kal vahomer lehekdesh, and not only that, when he does get to the hekdesh part, you can't say the hekdesh part was what he was talking about in the beginning, because he says, and it's a kal vahomer from there to hekdesh, which means that whatever he said in the first sentence, then we're copying it to hekdesh, which means he had to have said something before he got to the hekdesh. You can't say all he was talking about was the hekdesh. Ve'od, and thirdly, if you're not convinced by my convincing you about the wording of Rabbi Akiva here, well, I'll quote you a different braita, which is going to prove it and be explicit. Ve'od hama Rav Ashi tanya behedya. Rav Ashi said, I have a braita that explicitly says it. Meitav sadeu, meitav kamo yishalem. Meitav sadeu shel nizak, meitav kamo shel nizak. Divrei Rabbi Yishmael. Okay, that's word for word what we had. But here comes Rabbi Akiva, and it doesn't say lo baha katuv. The Torah only was telling you this, and all the more said a hekdesh. Listen to the wording here of his version of the braita. Meitav sadeu shel mazik, meitav kamo shel mazik. This is what you would have expected to have come in the first place, which was this is a much better version of the braita, because here Of course, it doesn't relate to the hekdesh part and the fact that they have these two arguments, but it's very clear that Rabbi Akiva is saying we evaluate it based on the person who damaged and not the person who was damaged. So it's clear in the end, and probably they had a tradition about this, and that was what was motivating the whole time to say this, that there's a basic machloket between Rabbi Yishmael and Rabbi Akiva, and this is really a big central machloket, because this is determining how we pay damages in general. Do I have to pay the best land from my land, or do I have to pay the best land of the land of the person I damaged? So that was section 1 of our daf, where we tried to evaluate what does Rabbi Akiva mean when he says vahomer lahekdesh, and then what is his position in general. And it really, again, it wasn't really what is his position, it was how can we be sure that his position is, that his debate with Rabbi Yishmael is what we said yesterday. Do we evaluate based on the damaged person's property or the best of the person, right, the person who did the damage or the person who received the damage? Now we're going to go into it next. Again, this is the complicated part of today's stuff. Rami le Abaye le Rav. Abaye brings a contradiction in front of Rav, and he says, I have a problem. Can you help me out? K'tiv meitav sadeh u'meitav karmo yishalem, which seems like you have to pay from the best of your land, and that's what you're supposed to pay for damages. Meitav in midi achrini lo. Okay, it sounds like the best, yes, but not anything else. Okay, meaning not metaltal movable property, things like that. But Hatanya, it says in a braita, yashiv. Now this is about bor. Now the assumption is all the avot nizikin, the rules of damage we already learned are all the same. Remember, we learned that if meitav exists by regel and shein, right, which is the pasuk where it appeared, it also exists for all the avot nizikin. So when it comes to bor, what does it say? Kesef yashiv leba'alav. Money you will return to the owner. So this word yashiv, they darshan, and they say lirabot shaveh kesef va'afilu subi. It means that you don't only have to give money, you can also give, which by the way means you could give land, you could give money. Again, we said land is basically even less than money, because money is fungible. You can use it right away, and that's the best, really. Land is second best, because you can basically, especially if it's the best land, you can easily sell it. And that's why it has to be the best, or at least one of the reasons. And then you have this idea that even something worth money, meaning movable property, even bran. Okay, now bran is considered very low. Okay, it's if you compare it, forget about comparing it to other objects that maybe are more useful, but right, flour is very useful, but bran was the low of the lows. Okay, we've talked about this a few times, right? That now whole wheat costs more money. In those days, it was the cheap garbage type thing because it wasn't sifted fully. It wasn't this. It had all the part stuff in it. Anyway, less important. So now, how could you possibly say I could pay with the best of my land, and in that same sentence say I could pay with subin? That makes no sense. So what we're going to have today is 4 resolutions to this contradiction. Actually, on Daf Tet, there's going to all of a sudden appear another resolution to this contradiction. But what we're going to see here is 4 options. All 4 are going to be, 3 out of 4 are going to be rejected. When we get to the second one, we're going to get off on to understand the second one is going to take a while. We're going to get off on a tangent on a totally different sugya, compare it to here. Then we're going to reject the comparison. And then after they reject the comparison, and then it has nothing to do with our sugya, we're going to say, oh, but if you wanted to compare it, you could compare it to this. And then we're going to reject that. And then the other person's going to say, oh, well, we could compare it to this. So we're going to get totally out of our sugya, and it's quite complicated, this part. So when we get to the second answer, so I'm just warning. Okay. Let's get to the first answer, which is not so complicated. Lo kashi. Kan midato, kan ba'al korcho. If I damage, okay, this happens often. I don't know, one day I backed into my neighbor's car and I damaged her car, and I went and I said, listen, I'm sorry, I damaged your car, and I'll just pay you whatever it costs to fix it. Okay, that's if I come on my own. So if I come on my own and I say, okay, I'm going to pay you back, I can actually pay you back in subin. Okay, that's fine. But if I don't admit that I did the damage, or I don't want to pay, and you have to take me to court and you have to prove it and show some witnesses that watched me back into your car and damage it, well, then I have to pay the best. So maybe it's like an incentive to go forward and just pay it, because you could pay anything you want. But once you go to court, and then we're going to say the pasuk is referring to when the court determines that you have to pay. And comes Ula, and he's going to support this claim by the wording of the pasuk. Amar Ula, Berei de Rav Eli, son of Rav Eli. Daikanami, you can infer this from the text of the Torah. Dichtiv Yishalem. It says, right, Metav Sadeu, the best of your land or the best of your kerem, Yishalem. you will have to pay. He translates it as, which sounds Baal Korcho, against your will. Abaye says that is not a good proof. And with that, Abaye basically rejects this whole interpretation. Even though he rejects the proof, he doesn't necessarily have to reject the interpretation, but it seems like he's not accepting Rava's answer. He says, Miktiv Yishulam, if you really wanted to say against your will, it would say will be paid, not an active you will pay, but will be paid, meaning against any, you don't want to pay, it will be paid. But Yishalem Ktiv, which sounds like Midat Mashma, Yishalem means you will pay. You will pay could mean I will pay because I decided to pay you, right? I damage, I will pay. It doesn't prove anything. So Abaye rejects this distinction. But Abaye comes and says, El Amar Abaye Kidamar. As Mar says, Mar, when Abaye refers to Mar, it's often Rabba, who adopted him. And therefore, right, remember Abaye's parents died before he was born, right? His mother died in childbirth, and he ends up getting adopted by Rabba, and he's quoting Rabba. Now, we're quoting something totally different from Rabba. We're going to forget by the time we get to the end of this where we were up to. I'm reminding you now, we're trying to resolve a contradiction. Do you have to pay with the best of your land, or can you pay with something that's just worth money, some movable item that even bran? So comes Abaye and he says, Ditani. Okay, now he's going to quote a braita. He's going to say, Rabbi didn't really understand this braita, and then he explained the braita not to be this, not to be that, but yes to be this. And then we're going to compare that to our case. So it's going to take a little while to get there. But it's a fascinating sugya about what makes someone below the poverty line. Now, it's a very easy answer. You're below the poverty line, according to the rabbis, meaning that you can get maaser ani. Remember, there's the poor man's tithe that goes in the 3rd year and the 6th year gets given to poor people, rather than maaser sheni, which is brought to Jerusalem in years 1, 2, 4, and 5. You bring to the poor people this tithe. Who's poor? How do you determine who gets this poor man's tithe? Well, you have to have less than 200 zuz. Remember 200 zuz from the ketubah, right? It's basically about money to live for a year. If you have less than that, not only in cash, but in your assets, then you get to get maaser ani. What if you don't have cash on hand? All you have is property that's worth 200 zuz. But we're going to see right now, now, once you get below the poverty line, the other thing to understand is they can give you as much money as you want. Okay, there's no limit to what they can give you. But you have assets that are not, right? They're houses, fields, or vineyards. But you can't sell them right now. You have to add the important words for their value. Okay, you can find someone to buy them, but they're going to buy them right now. Let's say they're worth 200 zuz, but you can only find a buyer for 150 zuz or 100 zuz. And you don't want to sell them. And now you claim I'm below the poverty line, but they say, but you have land that's worth 200 zuz. We can't give you money because you're worth more money than that. So, okay, so this is, by the way, I'm reading this according to the first explanation of Rashi. Later, if we have time, I'll maybe mention the second one, which is also a fascinating thing, but we won't have time to go through the whole sugya according to that interpretation. But you get maaser ani until half the value, meaning if your land is worth 200, we'll give you up to 100, basically, okay? We'll let you, let's say you could sell your land for 60 or for 50 or for 160, 140. We'll assume then your land is worth now 140. So you can sell it for that. You don't want to sell it for that. So we'll give you 60, okay? But if you claim your land is worth only 80, then we're not going to give you, in other words, there's no such thing. We just assume that land can't go down to less than half its value. It's not yet clear exactly this whole thing yet. We're going to have to figure out and try to understand this better. Now, Mar asks, okay, Rabbi asked about this braita. What is the situation here? Like, why can't I sell my land for, right? There's all different reasons why I can't sell my land for what its value is. Well, and it's all a question of what is land valued at, right? Anyone in real estate, and this is your business, you'll understand this sugya very well. I mean, I think we can all understand it, really. If the market is down right now, and no one can sell their land for the money that it's worth, well, then it's not really worth the money that we say it was worth, right? Then values have gone down. It's not worth it at all. Now, and when his property went down with everyone else, well, then basically I had land that was worth 200. Now my land is only worth 150, as is everybody else's, meaning the whole market went down. Well, basically then I only have 150 zuz worth of assets, which means I'm below the poverty line, which means they can give me as much as I want, not ad chetzi, okay? If it went down a ton, that's what the market is now. It happens, unfortunately. So now I'm below the poverty. What if all the other prices were going up or stayed the same? Well, this is something we also know. If I'm desperate to sell my land because I need money, well, everyone knows that you can get a good deal on that money on that land because I'll be willing to sell it for any price. So if I cause the price to drop, okay, but really meaning if I were to wait and I wouldn't be so desperate to sell, my land is actually worth 200 zuz. Well, then then even less they're not going to give me. In other words, that really means my land is worth 200 zuz. Just because I'm desperate to sell it and can't get a good price because of that, that doesn't mean anything. This land is worth 200 zuz. I actually own 200 zuz. So therefore, I'm not going to get anything. I'm not going to be able to claim poverty. But then Rabbi came and said on this, Lo tzricha de biyomi nisan yakara arata ubiyomi tishra zal arata. Rashi explains, okay, we're at the top of Amud now. Rashi explains that what's the issue? It depends what season we're living in. Now, what Rashi says applies to fields. Tosfot's going to say it also applies to houses, which again is going to get something very relevant that is interesting to see that in Tosfot time it was exactly the same as now. We'll get to that soon. Rashi says if you buy a field in Nisan, okay, so that's springtime. Well, that is when whoever buys it has plenty of time to plow it and get it ready for the next season and plant it before the next winter. So that's the ideal time to buy land. But if you buy it in Tishrei and it wasn't plowed yet, you're going to miss an entire season. That's a bad time to buy land. So anyone who buys land then, right, if someone's desperate to sell land then, they're going to be able to sell it for much cheaper, okay? So Tosfot says, okay, Rashi is very good and all that. It explains the whole thing about fields. But what about houses? If you look at Tosfot, Yomi Nisan Yikari Arata, the last three lines of Tosfot, he says, well, yesh lomal sherigilim sheyikru bizman sherigilim liskol batim ulachar shesachru zilu. There's a season for renting, okay? And the rental season is from Nisan on, okay? Anyone who goes to rent an apartment, right? Usually you start looking April, right? You start looking for the next year. And then once the summer passes, the rental market drops because nobody's looking to rent then. And that's the time that if you're going to sell your property, then the price is going to drop because all these people can't rent out their house. So then they look to sell and you're going to get a good price. So basically, right, I moved to my house. I rented a number of years, like a long time ago. I moved October 15th and we got a great deal on the rent because nobody wanted to rent in that season. And it's funny to think that in Tosfos time was the same thing. The year worked the same way. People generally rent in the summer. If you miss that window, then, everything's going to be much cheaper. So now we have land. Let's go back to our 200 and 100 zuz. You have land that in Nisan, you can sell for 200 zuz. But now it's Tishrei, and you can only sell that land. Okay, now they're going to assume what's this half? That's how much. We can't assume your land goes down more than half. But in Tishrei, it could be you can only sell it for 100 or somewhere in between 100 and 200. Now, so everyone else is going to wait till Nisan to sell their land. But this guy, but because he needs the money, he's going to sell it now and it's worth only 100. So so what's this until half? Half is the amount we assume you can get money for it. But any less than that, no one's going to sell it in Tishrei for less than half the price. You're not going to take such a great loss. So again, let's go back now and understand. So when it said in the beginning that this person, okay, so again, what was the case? You have Batim Sadot Kramim, you claim poverty now because it's Tishrei and you want to sell your land and you can only get 100 zuz for it. So you claim my land is only worth 100 zuz, and then you can get up to 100 zuz of charity money, okay? More than that, we're not going to give you because you're not really poor, because you do have assets that ultimately will be worth more. So you're not really poor, okay? That's the case. Now I'll give you Rashi, the second version of Rashi, which is actually on Amud Bet. Rashi says, I want to read it inside. Just give me a minute to find it. Should have marked it off. Where can I find it? Okay. Sorry, I'm trying to find it. Okay, sorry that I can't find it. Who will be when you some time? It's in the wrong Rashi here. So Lishma Chamina somewhere. Okay. Okay, I can't find it, but Rashi basically says, I'll just say it outside without reading it. Rashi says that the case is where I could be wealthy. I could actually be very wealthy. But if my property can only be sold now for half its value, for less than half its value, then that can put me in the poverty line. I can act in as if I want to sell my land. Let's say again, I have no cash. Okay, I'm wealthy to the extent, this is actually, right, how would this be? Let's say I inherited something. Okay, I'm very poor, but I inherited something, or my family had, right, like I bought it when land was cheap. Property values went up a lot, right? So I was very poor at the time. I bought something very small. Property values, skyrocketed over the years. Now I'm wealthy, but I'm only wealthy in my assets, not in, and I don't have a good job, let's say, and I don't make money. So if I want to sell that land, okay, and the alpalga here is a totally different thing. If I want to sell that land and I can't get the value of it now, and it's way under half its value, until half its value, right? Once it's less than that, I already can accept charity, because even though, which is a fascinating thing, it's about, can you accept charity even though you own a lot of assets, right? This is like a good question. When you go to get, welfare, what do they check, right? They check your income. Do they check your assets? Do they check what you own? And then it all depends on also what the value is. Anyway, there's a whole interesting interpretation of Rashi, which affects, again, all sorts of basic questions. Rashi, the first version, really understands it. It's technical. Are you close to the poverty line? Not. According to the second interpretation, you could actually be wealthy, but yet be considered under the poverty line, because if you're wealthy in assets only, and it's a bad time to sell them, then perhaps, we view things differently. So anyway, there's more to Rashi, the second version. It's very interesting, and the Rambam has a third. Anyway, it's a very fascinating study. Okay, but we're going to stick to what we're trying to do here. So now, why is this brought? Again, where were we? We brought this as a possible way to determine what the difference is between why it says Meitav Torah, and this braita says you could even pay with things that are valued, that have the value of money, movable property, like even bran. So comes Abaye and explains the following. We're now in, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Where is it? Right. Sorry, I skipped too long. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We're on the 6th line of our Daf. If you have the same Gemara lines as I do. Likewise here by Nizakin. Dine be'idit. Okay, by Nizakin, the law is idit. But now here we're going to get very off here. Okay, this is a very interesting comparison. The amalei ihu havli benoni tfei porta. Let's say, okay, I damage your property. I'm supposed to pay you with the best of my land. But instead, you say to me, listen, I don't really want that best land. I want to take worse land. Okay, I want to take benoni, a bigger section. Okay, probably you want a bigger piece of land, because again, let's say I owe you $100. My best land of $100 will be, let's say, 8 by 8, and the benoni land will be 10 by 10, right? Worth the same $100. And maybe it's closer to your fields. So you prefer to have something closer to your fields. So you're happy to take the benoni. So now, and we're standing in what month? In Tishrei. Now in Tishrei, all this land is worth half the amount it will be worth in Nisan. So you can say to me the following. This is what Abaye makes a claim for, that there's 2 tracks, and that's what Meitav is 1 track. And if you don't go with Meitav, then it's the other track, and you can even get Subim. Okay, which really here is going to mean not that you could get metaltal in the value of, and even in bran. It means you can get a bad deal. Okay, what does this mean? Amarle, I can say to you when you go to collect and you're supposed to collect damages, I can say to you the following. Ishalkat kedinach, if you're going to take, according to the law, shkol kedahashta, I'm going to give you this land. I owe you, let's say it's 200 zuz, and this land is now worth 100. It will be worth 200. I'll have to pay you 2 pieces of land that size, because now it's worth 100 and you're collecting damages today. So you're going to collect the damages based on its value today. So you're going to get double. But if you want to choose a Benoni track, you want something else? Well, when it's ED, you're going to get the best deal. But if you're going to go Benoni, you're going to get it based on what it's going to be worth in Nisan. So basically, I'm going to give you the small plot of land that's worth 100 now. Okay, it'll be worth 200 in a few months from now. I owe you 200. I'm giving you this land, one piece that's worth 100. Okay, even though, right, it ultimately will be, because it will be worth ultimately 200. Now, logically, this makes no sense, and that's what the Gemara is going to say. And that's, why should you get penalized because you're choosing worse land? It makes no sense. Okay, but that's his suggestion to resolve this contradiction. So Matkefla Rav Acha bar Yaakov, he says, what are you talking about? This makes no sense. Im ken horato kolchan shenizakim etzel benoni v'ziburi. Derachman amar mimeitav v'at amar mibenoni v'ziburi namilo. When the Torah said meitav, it didn't mean only pay from the best. And this is premised on the fact, if you don't choose the Torah option of the best, well, then you can get screwed. But that's not what the Torah said. The Torah was saying you can get even from the best. Of course, you could get a good deal for Benonit and Ziburit. And therefore, if you're going to say that you get paid in Nisan, if you get paid in Tishrei and the land is worth half, of course, you're going to get double the amount. Whether it's Benonit, Ziburit, Edid, it doesn't matter. When the Torah gave you Edid, it didn't say only Edid, it meant even Edid. So there's no way that could be the interpretation, and therefore there's no resolution to the contradiction. Now, we could have stopped here, but Rav Acha bar Yaakov, who had a difficulty with Abaye, says, well, if you're already making a comparison, we can make a comparison to the following case. Okay, so now we're back to this Batim Sadot and Kramim case, where it was valued differently in Nisan and Tishrei. And it's about collecting from land, but it's a different situation. Okay, why don't you compare it to a regular creditor who's collecting money back? Now, Baal Chov Dina B'Benoni. Okay, Baal Chov gets to collect from the average type land. Do you remember why this is? It's because really it's Ziburit, but the worst, but Kadesha Lotin Ol Delet B'Fnei Lovim. We don't want to close the doors and say, oh, no one's going to lend money because they can only get it back from poor land. So we upped it to Benoni, the rabbis did. But basically it's laws Benoni. So now they're going to say, the Amarle Havli Ziburit Tvei Porta, if the creditor comes and says, listen, I don't want your Benoni land, give me the Ziburit land, Amarle, the same thing. Ishalkat Kadinach. If you're going to take Benoni, I'll give you the rate of now, meaning you'll get double, because right now it's worth 100, even though ultimately it will be worth 200. I owe you 200, I'll give you two pieces this size. But ilo shakel ki yukra de lekame. But if not, and you want Ziburit, well then I'm going to give you Ziburit based on what it will be in Nisan, and you're going to end up with less. So, Matkefla Rav Acha bar Rav Ika, what are you talking about? If you say that, you're again putting the creditor on the bad, right? He's basically, if he wants land that's closer to him, that happens to be Ziburit, what, he's going to lose out? That makes no sense. To Amrle, Ilu, and it really makes no sense because he'll say the following argument. Remember, bad land is very hard to sell. And he could say the following. Ilu, let's say you lent me money, and now you come to collect the land, and you're going to collect now from my Ziburit land. And I'm going to tell you, if you collect from the Ziburit land, you're going to lose out. You're going to get it based on the 100. You're going to get a piece that's worth 100 now, even though, because later it'll be worth 200. And because you're not going on the track that you're supposed to, you're going to lose out. So you could say to me, Ilu havale zuze. Now, I don't have 200 zuz right now in hand. Why don't I have? Because I loaned it to you, okay? But if I had 200 zuz right now and I came over to you to buy that piece of land, what would I get? I would get two pieces of land for that 200 zuz, right? So Iva havale zuze right now, shakle kedahashta. I would be able to buy that land for the price it is right now at 100, and I would get two pieces that size. Hashta dezuze gabar. Now that the money's in your hand and I don't have the money and I'm trying to get mine back. Eshko kiyukra de lekame. You're going to try to give me based on the high price? It makes absolutely no sense. So they reject this comparison as well. So the person who basically said to Rav Acha, this doesn't make any sense, right? There was Bar Acha Bar Yaakov, this is Rav Acha Bar Ika. He says, if you want to compare it though to something, I'll give you something to compare it to. I'm reminding you, we're totally off topic now because we brought this as a possible way to resolve the contradiction. We said that comparison doesn't make any sense. And therefore, right, there's no way that because you went down to Benoni, you're going to get worse, like Subin. And therefore, Subin was really more like a metaphor here in this interpretation. But we said, no, that doesn't make any sense. But we keep trying to find other comparisons. So now instead of, okay, let's just put it conceptually. Instead of saying, if you don't pick the best track, you're going to pick a less good track, we're going to make it actually, right, like you're going to take something of less value, we're going to make it worse for you, which logically makes absolutely no sense. We're now going to go the reverse direction. We're going to go up. You want to take better land than you're deserving of, then we're going to say you lose out. Okay, so that's the k'tubat isha. It's like the k'tub of a woman, midamina. It compares much more to that case. Da k'tubat isha dina b'ziburi. You might remember the k'tuba of a woman, she collects from the worst land. V'i amrale ihi havli benoni. If she goes and she says, I want benoni land, b'tzir porta, give me a smaller piece, right? Instead of this 10 by 10 ziburit land I'm supposed to get, give me an 8 by 8 piece of ziburit land. I'm sorry, a benoni land, a better quality land. Then this is going to work. Amrala, he could say to her, listen, ishakal kadina achlo. This is what you're deserving of, ziburit. You want to take ziburit? Shkol kedahashti. You'll get the ziburit at the value it is now. It's at 100. You'll get 2 pieces of 10 by 10. Elo, and if you don't take ziburit, shakle kiyukra de la kameh. Well, you want benoni land? Well, then I can just say, listen, this land ultimately in 6 months will be worth 200 zuz. Take this one piece and, we're done. So that's the comparison that eventually does work. And that's what they're going to say is comparison. You see the obvious difference because here she's trying to get something that is more than what she's deserving of. And then he can say, basically, I'm giving you according to the poor rate. Okay, Kamma, that was the hard part of today's daf, understanding that case itself and then the 3 cases that are potentially comparisons. Now we're going to say, Kamma kasha. In case you didn't remember, we're still in a contradiction. So the Gemara says we still have a difficulty because Abaye didn't resolve it. So I'm a Rav. Again, contradiction, meitav sadeu versus even subin, right? Something worth money and not even land. Kol diyahivle, mi meitav leitivle. What meitav means is not really the best of your field. It means the best of whatever it is you're giving. If you're paying in money, well, money, no, but if you're paying in land, the best of the land. If you're paying in metaltalin, you're paying in bran, pick the best brand that you have. Vaha meitav sadeu. If they don't, oh, by the way, this is Rava. Rava was answered the question in the first place, but Abaye rejected his answer, so Rava suggests another answer. Well, ha meitav sadehu. If you can't say meitav means the best of whatever it is, because it says the best of your field, which means it must be field. So, final answer, Eliki Ata, Rav Papa, Rav Huna, Bered, Rav Yoshua, Mibei Rav, when they came from the house of Rav, Pershua, they explained the following. Kol mili meitav. Everything is considered meitav. Because if I have bran, and let's say nobody in my neighborhood wants bran, I can go to the next door neighborhood and I'll find somewhere to sell it. And it's easy to take it to the next door neighborhood because I can move it. But the vad me'ara, other than land is not like that. I can't just take my land and sell it somewhere else. If nobody wants it in my town, right, then I'm not going to find anywhere to sell it. And this is what I told you before. The reason you're paying in land is so that people will buy it. And that's why you have to give the best of your land, because if it's bad land, you might not ever find anyone to buy it. And then what? I damage your property. I give you poor land. You can't sell it. You really lose out. So therefore, I have to give you the best land because land is not something you can move around. So you have 2 tracks, according to the answer here. One track is pay with the best of your land so that they can easily sell it, or pay with any kind of property, because movable property can be sold and taken to the next door place. If you don't find anyone who's interested in this item in your neighborhood, you could probably find somewhere else to sell it. And therefore, that can be turned into money more easily than land can. And that's a very interesting interpretation that we didn't really think was the case before, but that's what the answer that they give. Now we have one last question for today. So just to review until now, what we did was we started with Rabbi Akiva, trying to understand how do we know what he disagrees with Rabbi Yishmael about is b'demazik b'ninizat. Then we proved it, and we had to explain also what is vahomer lahektish, what the case is referred to there. Then Abaye brought this contradiction to Rava. We have Rava resolved it. Abaye rejected it. Abaye brought a different suggestion by making this comparison to that case with the houses and the land, and that was rejected. And then we saw 2 other possible things to compare it to, and then we went back and had 2 other answers to what the resolution to the contradiction was, and in the end we're left with really only one last answer. Now, Bamine Rav Shmuel bar Abba me'Ukranya mi Rabbi Abba. So he asked the following question: Kashem shamim b'shaloim shamim u'b'shel olam hem shamim. When we evaluate best, do we evaluate best based on the best of your land, or the best? Is it an objective thing? Is it based on the best land in the world? Now we're going to understand this question a bit better. Alibi de Rabbi Yishmael lo tibaylach. Damar b'din yizak shemin. Okay, clearly we're not talking about Rabbi Yishmael. So Rabbi Yishmael said it all goes based on the person who you damaged. So clearly it's going to be the person who you damaged. Doesn't matter, right? It's obviously relative. But ki tibaylach, because remember, he said if their worst land is like your best land, all you have to pay is the worst land. So it's clear it's subjective. Ki tibaylach alibi de Rabbi Akiva. Damar b'din mazik shemin. So now when Rabbi Akiva says it goes by the best of the person who damaged land, do we say metav sadeo amar chmana lemiute denizak? Is it to say the best of mine as opposed to the best of yours? Meaning, if your worst your best is like my worst, well, I still have to pay based on mine, right? I have to pay a higher amount. Do we say that my metav lemiute denizak, which would mean that as what's the issue? If we just said a minute ago, it's so the people buy it, then maybe it just has to be the best, meaning what's considered best in the market. So it has to be something objective. Whatever the best in the market is, that's what I have to pay. Or does it mean, and this would be more that we're punishing me, let's say I have superb land, better than the best land of the world. I have the best quality land in the world. Do I have to pay from that? Okay. Are we saying best means best of mine not compared to the nizak right? Best of mine compared to everyone in the world. Whatever I have that's best, I have to pay, which again, is focusing more on penalty for me. Or is it just so that they can easily sell it? And therefore it doesn't matter as long as it's best considered in the world. If I have better land, I don't have to give my super duper best land. That's the question. So the answer is Amarle, Rachmana Amal, Metav Sadeu, V'atamart b'shalolam shamin. The Torah said the best of your land. Your land means the mazik's land means yours. So if I have superb land, I have to pay the superb land. We're going to stop here. The Gemara is going to bring a question, but the question doesn't even come up. First, they're going to quote a braita, and the question is going to come up in an explanation of the braita on the next stop. So we'll stop here for today. So that was our last section. So a lot of dealing with what metav is. This whole sugya really got us to think about. First of all, we learned about stuff about being below the poverty line. How do we determine? And we also were able to talk about why exactly you have to pay metav. What's the purpose? And talked about some different thoughts about what might be the motivation of the Torah to make you pay with the best of your land. Wishing everybody a good day and hoping for better news.